Hello Earthlings, welcome back. I'm Chelsea. So today's video is going to be a sort of origin video of how I came to be here. How did I get here? Someone on Instagram asked sort of how I came to be, and I was just like, oh man, that's gonna be a mouthful. So I would say my whole spiritual reactivation began in, I feel like this is crooked, sorry guys, just let me, my OCD just came out. My spiritual reactivation began in 2012. I always considered myself a spiritual person. I had tarot cards in high school, but I wasn't like deep into it. I really had no idea. Like I always was super into aliens, but I didn't know they existed as light beings, so to speak. And I started dating this guy around 2012, and it was so divinely timed, not so much with him, but because his father was super into sacred geometry, super into the Pleiadians. I mean, he literally told me who the Pleiadians were. I was like, I had no idea. We would go out to the Integratron and do private sleepovers. The Integratron is this sound healing dome out in Landers, California, which is near Joshua Tree. We would have like 10 of us sleeping in the Integratron for like private sleepovers because he was friends with the sisters who owned it. And we would do like 12-hour gong ceremonies. And so it was him where I just felt completely lit up speaking with the father, because we would talk about like ancient aliens, and he actually was interviewed just on ancient aliens too recently, which is so funny. But we would talk about ancient aliens and Egypt, and we would talk about Stonehenge and the Pleiadians, and he really only told me about the Pleiadians. I had no idea there was even more light beings. And we would talk about Saganda, who is the star person that helped create the Integratron in the 40s or 50s or something like that. And so it was really nice, and he actually hosted a spiritual radio show in Laguna Beach and would often have the guests come over for dinner after the interview. And so it felt like I was just suddenly around this whole spiritual world, this spiritual community, and it really opened my eyes to just new things. So to me, it was just divinely, obviously that relationship didn't last, but to me it was more about opening up to this. I mean, we spent the December 21st, 2012 at the Integratron, and I would say that was my first experience with light beings without really recognizing it. I didn't know at the time that you could see like spirits or ghosts only in your third eye. I just thought, and the same with light beings. So when I started seeing spirits, when I moved to Australia, I was like, only in my third eye. And I just thought if you saw a ghost, you would see it physically. Same with aliens. And we were hiking around Joshua Tree, and I saw this like portal open up in my imagination, so to speak, my third eye. And this being came through, this like bluish green being, and kind of just stood there and looked at me. And the portal was like this giant, they were like, it was about 7 or 8 feet tall, the portal, and the being was kind of similar height. And it just kind of walked out and it closed the portal and then just kind of walked into the desert. And I was like, just thinking it was my imagination. I'm like, God, that would have been cool. Like if I saw that. I was like, I wish that happened. That'd be so sick. I'd love to go talk to that alien. And now I know that really did happen. I was just seeing, I mean, we were doing gong ceremonies and also, and just the energy of the Integratron as well. So I was definitely really open. And then that night for the winter solstice, December 21st, which was that whole like Quetzalcoatl, whatever, Mayan calendar thing, we were doing a gong ceremony, and we were doing the sound bath or something, and I opened my eyes and I could see this grid. It was like a light bluish white, just a typical grid where it's like a bunch of squares, and they're about 1 foot by 1 foot in size, and it was just about like pulsing just an inch off the wall, and I felt super peaceful. And this was something I physically saw with my actual eyes, and I'm like, this is so interesting. Like, what is this? It felt like I was tripping, but everyone was sober. And after that sound bath, I told my then boyfriend's father, I'm like, oh, I saw this like thing. He's like, I saw it too. So we were both sort of, our frequency was tapping into something, and it felt very validating for him to see the same thing. And so after me and that boyfriend broke up, I went through a complete rock bottom. It was during my Saturn return. I did a lot of drinking and partying and using drugs. I did a lot of cocaine, and it was just a complete rock bottom, because I think during this process of me discovering this spiritual community and even my spiritual side, I didn't fully jump into it. I didn't fully accept it or just jump off the cliff into it. And I feel like the universe was like, all right, let's like pull the rug from under her and put her into a little rock bottom. And I feel like this is a kind of a common story for some people, maybe some of you watching. It's you just keep living life in like the safe zone and just kind of in the life of comfort and just don't really put yourself out there. And so that's kind of what I felt when I looked. It was really hard going through that, just like numbing, and I'm also an emotional eater, so it was just so much of just pushing everything down. But it was through that, because I went through that process. It was about 6 months of just heavy and partying. I think from like start to finish it was 2 years. So shadow of it going in where I'm like partying more and I'm like, oh, this is kind of fun and different for me. And then like a year of like, oh, holy shit, this is dark. And then like a 6 month shadow out. And on that 6 month shadow out, I sat 10 days of Vipassana meditation, which is a silent meditation retreat. I didn't have any spiritual or alien ET encounters there, but I just felt my soul for the first time. I felt like that deep, loving kindness, just the deepest, most profound compassion. I didn't know it at the time, but it was a direct connection to my soul. And I left there and I just was like, there's so much more for me out there. And I didn't drink for 6 months. Yeah, so I didn't drink for 6 months. Of course, because I wasn't drinking, I wasn't doing party drugs. Trained for a marathon. And through all of this, I was like, okay, at the end of this whole healing journey, I'm gonna go travel for 2 months by myself. I'm gonna go to Bali and Vietnam and Thailand. And so I go on the trip. 3 days in, I meet my now partner. It was just, I would love to do a whole video just on that, because even he, like 3 days into us knowing each other, he's like, I feel like we've been together for 6 months. And he's not like a spiritual type, but for me, I just was like, oh my God, like we've done lives together, just past lives. It was just a complete soul recognition on both our parts. And so we met in October 2017. May 2018, I moved to Australia. He and I met in Bali. And we just hit it off. He's Aussie, and I moved to Australia, and I felt like as soon as I landed on this soil, I don't know what it is, I just completely blossomed and opened up. I can't even describe the experience. I felt the most like myself I'd ever really felt. Of course, I'm with like my soulmate, love of my life, but I just felt like on my own, I just completely bloomed into this new human. And at the time, I had just done yoga teacher training. I was a surf and skate photographer. And my partner and I, we were driving home from Byron Bay. And when you're driving, it's easy to get into that sort of theta state, that trance meditative state, because you're just seeing the same stuff on the road, and it kind of puts you into a really calm state. And I received this whole download that I'm no longer meant to be a photographer. It was basically my spirit guides and soul tell me, like, you're not meant to be a photographer. You're not even meant to teach yoga, but you'll figure that out soon. You're meant to heal people. You have a certain set of gifts, and you're meant to be of service. You're meant to be of service to others. And my Instagram at the time was just completely surf and skate, whatever, photos, like my photography. Very next day, I just did a post on like how to, heal our triggers or whatever it was. And I got a really big reaction. And so I completely switched. I stopped posting my photography on Instagram and just started posting spiritual quotes and pictures and sort of downloads that I was receiving. And from there, my psychic gifts started coming online again. And I say again because I could look back and see I was definitely a really psychic child, as I'm sure most of us all were. And it was just through this reactivation that they were coming online. And I kind of was like, I never thought I could be psychic, that I totally had like the conditioning programming of like psychics are whatever, the people with crystal balls. And I heard Bree Melanson on the Almost 30 podcast. Bree Melanson's my teacher. She's an intuitive channel and psychic. And just listening to her story, I was like, I have those experiences. Like, wait, I do that. And I always joke that I'm naive because like I'll see or hear something. I'm like, whatever, not a big deal. Like, I'm not like, let me go on the internet and Google what this means. And so finally being led to that podcast and hearing that, I was like, oh, maybe I'm psychic, maybe I'm intuitive. And just at that moment, Natalie Miles, who's also a psychic, came out with her whole podcast called So You Think You're Intuitive. So I had the resources. And shortly after that, I discovered the Akashic Records and had a pretty, I don't want to say easy time, but a pretty flowy time of tapping into those. I started reading for others, but it didn't really feel like this is it. It just didn't feel like my thing. And I always I use a lot of art analogies. I'm like, you're in art school and sure you can paint and you can draw, but where you really thrive is sculpture. And so I felt that with Akashic Records. I didn't really know what else was out there, but I started reading people. I'm like, yeah, I could do this, but it just doesn't feel like the thing that's lighting up my soul. And I did that for about a year. I started connecting with my spirit guides, and unbeknownst to me, also my star guides, light beings. I just would have sort of telepathic conversations. I started meditating more, and so in meditation I'd have like full conversations in my head with whoever. I had kind of heard about light beings and aliens. I still was just kind of feeling it out, and really I had already been communicating with light beings and star people. They just hadn't really presented themselves to me like that for the purpose of like easing into it. And so how I started channeling, I remember getting acupuncture, and it was the first time, so I didn't really realize that you sometimes just have to lay there for an hour and you can't really move. I had the needles in my wrists and stuff, so I couldn't pull out my phone. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'll just connect with my guides. This is like the perfect time because I'm stuck here for an hour. And I had a spirit guide named White Fox, who was like a Native American. I think we also did a past life together, and he has transitioned now to be solely a spirit guide. And then I had a group of these 5 beings come through, and they called themselves Jacob, and they just looked like they were made of light. And they let me know they were Palladian. And I'm like, all right, this is sick. And I could hear them and see them very clearly. And I just received this whole download of who I'm going to be, like what my purpose is, and how I can better serve humanity. And so I started consciously communicating with them. I would sit in meditation, I would call Jacob forward, and we'd have like these dope conversations. And they would like, I remember too, because I think my last video I did on darkness, where they were like, wars rage through the cosmos and blah blah blah, and I was like, what war are you talking about? Like, there's no war in space. Like, everything is just love and light. And so that's when I look back at that, I'm like, oh, they're talking about the Lyran War, I believe, or like with Orion. I'm not sure what it's called, but it was so funny because I remember being like, what war? You guys are wild. But they're basically showing me kind of Star Wars type stuff, that these wars that happened millions of years ago or hundreds of thousands of years ago, and how that sort of created a ripple effect throughout the cosmos. So I was receiving really cool stuff. They were showing me about time travel, and I was like, this is sweet. And one time I was really in deep meditation, and we were telepathically communicating within my mind's eye. I felt like this sensation in my throat, and I couldn't really, I just was like, this is so weird. I feel like I need to speak. And I just want to know, at this time, I really didn't know what channeling was. Like, to me, I didn't realize Esther Hicks or Abraham Hicks, like that's channeling. I had no idea. I just, again, I'm not one to like hop online and really Google stuff. Mostly because I don't even know what questions to Google. It's like, and so I started speaking, and my voice, like my body started swaying. Like even before, when I felt the tingles in my throat, like my body just felt like, I tell people, and I know this is like a horrible, actually it's not a horrible analogy, but to me I'm like, it feels like you're coming up on Molly. If I used to go to raves, so where I'm like, whoa, like I feel really like light but heavy. And I started speaking, and they were speaking in we, and my voice became very soft and slow, and they were just dropping knowledge. It came out so much more clearly than anything I've ever experienced. And it was about 20 minutes. And when I came out, I kind of had this like, whoa, I forgot I had a body. Like my consciousness completely removed itself, and their consciousness came through me. And I just was like, oh my God, I forgot I was in my house. I forgot like I'm Chelsea and I'm this human in this physical plane. And I couldn't really remember what they said. I was like, what was that thing about, you know? I was like, oh, I need to record this. And recording wasn't easy. I kind of got stage fright, but after some time I recorded it and then started doing videos, and then really jumped off the cliff and started sharing those videos. And it was interesting too, because I was telling someone, I'm like, oh, like I'm doing this, and you know, I don't know what this experience is, but it's really cool. And she's like, oh, you're channeling. I'm like, I am? And she's like, yeah. And I think too, the confusion, there's different forms of channeling, but you know, it's like people will be like, oh, I channeled this book, it was channeled through me. And I just had never heard of in-body channeling or trance channeling. So I was like, oh, shit. And I kind of became scared, because then she was like, you better watch out for negative entities getting you. And I'm like, well, don't say that, because now I'm scared that they will. And so from that space, I was like, well, maybe it's time for me to have a teacher. I've been working with my energetic gifts for about 3 years on my own, just all self-taught, which is great, but maybe I'm ready for a teacher. And so I ended up taking Bree Melanson's psychic boot camp, because she goes through channeling. She doesn't teach you how to trance channel, channeled writing, but that's like the best place to start, because I did channeled writing for ages before I ever even actually started channeling. And her course, this isn't like a plug for her course, but I'm just saying, my view is, if you want to work with your energetic gifts, do it with yourself for a little bit before you have other people's perspectives or lessons or teachings sort of conditioned onto you. Because for me, it's like when I was in that course, I just felt like, okay, I'm super comfortable with how my gifts show up, and I'm super comfortable here, and now I'm just expanding on that. And so after the course, I've just started taking clients and doing videos and teaching everything that I've been learning from these beings of light, from the star peoples, and from my own soul, and from my star guides. And so, I mean, that's basically it. That's kind of how I got here. It's been a long journey, but it's been a long time coming. And I have some plans. I mean, I plan to create my own course. I plan to create my own sort of guided visualizations. My whole sort of role here on Earth is to be a teacher, and also to act as a bridge between this earthly physical plane and the cosmos. I think that's one of my greatest gifts, is bridging those two worlds so that we operate differently in the physical. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining me. I love you as always, and I'll see you next time.